All right, worship in the Old Testament. Are you ready for this? Why we're doing this is, again, remember how we talked about in the first session? Do you mind if I come down here? I just feel so far away. How we talked in the first session about God defines worship. So what we want to do is systematically, somewhat, it's not as deep as it could be, obviously, but we want to go through how God uses the word worship in the Bible. That's what this is for. So it's really important because he gets to define it. We don't get to define it. He does. So that's where we're starting. David Peterson's book, Engaging with God, was very helpful for me back in the late 90s in terms of understanding how the Bible talks about worship. So a number of these thoughts, I'll quote him here frequently, but a number of these thoughts are from the book. Here's one. The biblical words for worship do not represent discrete concepts, but are part of a whole mosaic of thought about the way to relate to God. So when we talk about worshiping God, we are talking about a relationship that's characterized, has certain characteristics to it. So one of those characteristics is that it's homage, it's grateful submission, it's honoring the Lord and respecting him, reverencing him. So the most common word that we translate worship in the Old Testament is hishtachava. It occurs 171 times in the Old Testament. In the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament, it's translated by the word proskuneo in 164 of those instances. So there's a close connection. Its basic meaning, so this is the word that's most often used for worship, is to bow down, to prostrate oneself as a sign of reverence and respect and honor. It isn't necessarily just a deity that we're doing that for. It could be anyone. It's to show reverence and honor. It could also be a nonverbal gesture of a subject before superior, just like a bow. It could be hishtachava, where you're worshiping. So that's at the heart of it. Bowing before the Lord fundamentally expressed awe and submission to God. It's saying, we want to follow you. It was often a sign of gratefulness or dependence. We're saying, we need you. And it was used frequently to describe an immediate and spontaneous response to events and circumstances, something that God had done. So we read in Genesis 24, 26 and 27, the man bowed his head and worshiped the Lord and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and his faithfulness toward my master." So that's when I think he found Rachel. He realized, oh, this is the one I was looking for. Exodus 4:31, the people believed, and when they heard that the Lord had visited the people of Israel and that he had seen their affliction, they bowed their heads in worship. So there you get that sense of gratefulness. And it wasn't a planned act. They just did it. They recognized God had done something for them, and so they bowed their heads in worship. When no adverbial phrases are used, like to the earth, before God, the word can be taken in a more abstract way. So not a physical gesture, but paying homage, just in the heart, as a way of saying, yeah, I honor the Lord. I want to reverence the Lord. So in Genesis 22:5, Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come back to you." Doesn't define it. There's going to be a sacrifice. But the purpose of that sacrifice is to show reverence to God. That's always at the heart of it. It's never just a sacrifice. It's we'll get into it. We'll go on. Worship is service. So there's another set of words that we translate worship. And it's abad, meaning to serve. The phrase is usually rendered worship and serve. And fundamentally, it meant working to fulfill the interests of another. You know how Philippians says, look not only to your own interests, but also to the interests of others. So that's what this is. It's saying, I'm not going to look to my interests alone. I'm going to look to the interests of God. And it's frequently used in passages referring to the Israelites engaging in idolatry. So you don't just do this for God. Remember, we talked about how worship can be towards anything. A lot of times this word is used as a sign of how Israel was not worshiping God. They were serving idols. Part of the ritual of service came to stand for the whole, so that bowing before the Lord came to represent devotion and submission to him as a pattern of life. It's the way we're going to live. So simply to do the act of bowing is one thing, but to say this means that in my life I'm going to always seeking to obey you. That's what I want to do. Israel disconnected those. And God says, you can't disconnect them. The gesture is important, but it's not the most important thing. It's a sign of the way you want to live your life. But the Old Testament makes it clear that what we do when we gather is meant to reflect what we do in life. So if in here we're proclaiming how great the Lord is, what does that mean for the way we live? We should be proclaiming how great the Lord is. It's not like this is our holy time, our sacred time. It is in a sense, but all of life is sacred. And when we're driving a car, when we're interacting with friends, when we're spending money, when we're with a family, whatever we're doing, the same attitude is to be in our hearts. That's always been God's intention. And he says, as your meetings go, so go your lives. Although you can do this hypocritically, and that's what God speaks to. And we'll see that later. Serving the Lord is a comprehensive term for Israel's relationship with God. So you have the reverence and awe, but that's not all it is. It is serving. It's acting in a way that shows all my decisions, all my things that I want to do, they're submitted to you, and I'm going to seek to serve you in my life. So we have Deuteronomy 10, 12, and 13. Now, Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve, abad, the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to keep the commandments and statutes of the Lord, which I'm commanding you today for your good. So today when we use the word worship, most of the times we're not thinking of serving. We're thinking of singing. But God says, I want you to think of serving. That's how you worship me. And that became particularly expressed in the cult, or the gathering, the meeting. And that's another word, seret, translated by the Greek word letrogein, referred more specifically to the work of the priests and the Levites in the temple or the tabernacle. And that's the word that we get our word, at least the English word, liturgy. So Peterson says this about that. Cultic activity was meant to be a means of maintaining the holiness of God's people. So one of the reasons for the gathering is to remind us how we're supposed to live. If we never met, we wouldn't have those reminders. But gathering together tells us, oh yeah, this is why we're meeting. This is why we're living. This is what the aim of our life should be, to give glory to God and Jesus Christ through the power of the Spirit. That's what it's meant to be, not just here, but in life. So the priests were encapsulating that. So Peterson said, cultic activity was meant to be a means of maintaining the holiness of God's people. More obviously than the language of homage, the terminology of service implies devotion to God as a pattern of life. The problem for translation and for theology is that the English word worship is generally used too narrowly. Now, I don't know in Amharic or in Somali or whatever language we're looking at, if you have that same issue, would there be a word that you translate worship in Amharic? Just one word pretty much? And would you think of it similar to the way we do in English? Like that's the singing, or? Yeah, so there's some continuity. And do you ever hear people use that word for worship to mean serving God? at times, but not typically. What do you think, Alan? And I don't know about other languages, but every language I've checked, it's similar. It's the worship tends to be what we do when we gather, when we sing. And what I hope we walk away with is God says that is way too narrow. I know you get affected when you sing, but that's way too narrow. When I use that word in my word, I want you to think of your whole life. So that's what this is getting to. In general, point 2 there, adoration of God in the Old Testament was not a form of intimacy with God or an indication of special affection towards him, but rather this expression of awe or grateful submission, a recognition of his gracious character and rule. So I think in maybe Pentecostal worship, I'm not sure, we're talking about the gathering, there is this mindset that you have to reach this point of intimacy with God, this closeness with God. And what Peterson is saying is that's not what the word was typically used for. It was more the reverence and awe and submission. I want to serve you, God. So laying down my life to serve you. You don't have to feel intimate with God to say that. I want to serve you because you're worthy. And then there's one other word used. Worship is reverential awe. The word yare, very common word in the Old Testament, carries the connotation of terror and awe. So we're getting less intimate now. Exodus 20, 18 and 20 contains both meanings. Now when all the people saw the thunder, this is at Mount Sinai, and the flashes of lightning, the sound of the trumpet, and the mountain smoking, it's a pretty awe-inspiring sight. The people were afraid and trembled, and they stood far off and said to Moses, "You speak to us, and we will listen, but do not let God speak to us lest we die." And Moses said to the people, "Do not fear, for God has come to test you, that the fear of him may be before you, that you may not sin." So we can be afraid of the wrong things. And worshiping God says, I'm going to fear God. So in the illustration I shared before of my life, I feared what people thought of me. I feared people. I feared their perceptions of me, what they said about me. That is not the same as fearing God. Parents do this with their children. They fear their children and their response more than they fear God. God says, fear me. We do it with our friends. That's peer pressure. That's what that is. I don't want to be on your bad side. I don't want to have you think low of me. Well, if that causes you to disobey God, you fear them more than you fear God. Jesus says in John 5:44, how can you believe if you accept the praise of God, praise of men, and make no effort to obtain the only praise, the praise that comes from the only God? They're at odds with each other. So God is saying, to worship me, you must fear me. And most scholars agree that in Deuteronomy, to fear Yahweh means virtually to worship God with awe. Now there's also this element of worship as praise, musical praise and celebration. So there's a whole list of words that we're going to look at briefly that describe that, which is not typically the words that we translate worship. They're more the words of praise. So it's a distinct thing, but it's under the category of worship. This is giving glory to God, giving honor to God. So you have Hallel or Tehillah. It's the most common word for praise in the Old Testament. The Hebrew verb denotes an expression of appreciation for someone's good qualities, especially those that are essential to his character or nature. It's the root of the word hallelujah. Do you say that in Amharic? Hallelujah. Yeah, all over the world, that word is used. It's one of the words that is just transliterated. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Everybody knows what you mean. Hallelujah. Well, what it means is praise Yah. God is to be praised. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, and his greatness is unsearchable. Psalm 150. Praise the Lord. Hallelujah. So that's the most common word for praise. And then there's Todah, implies acknowledgement or thanking God for what he has done or what he's going to do. And notice in the description of these different words, how specific God gets about how we're to respond to him. So we can think of worship as this general category, but God's saying, oh no, it involves this and this and this and this. And how often our worship of God is just, oh God, you're great. You sent Jesus to die for me. Praise the Lord. And that's as far as we go. God makes it very specific. So he has all these different words that imply there's all kinds of things you can be doing in your relationship with me. You can be celebrating. You can be thanking me for what I've done. So let us come into his presence with thanksgiving. With thanksgiving. That doesn't mean that we're all extroverts, or we're all just really happy, or we had a good day. It means we recognize God has done something. We recognize that he is gracious and good and kind and merciful, and we are so grateful. That's what it means. Come into his presence with thanksgiving. Zamar means to play a musical instrument. So in Psalm 92, we read earlier, it is good to give thanks to the Lord, to sing praises to your name. That's really play a song to his name. I will praise the Lord as long as I live. I will sing praises to my God while I have my being. You have yada. It's a thankful expression of praise, from the word meaning to throw out the hands. I didn't mention that earlier. Todah can imply a lifting of the hands. This is where that physical engagement comes into play. The very words themselves are saying something about what our bodies should be doing. So we saw that in the first words about worship, a bowing down, a prostrating. There's something our bodies are doing. That means God is interested in that. It's not irrelevant. It matters. So yada is a thankful expression of praise, from the word meaning to throw out the hands. Praise the Lord. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart in the company of the upright in the congregation. Well, yeah, you can do it that way. But really it means I will give thanks to the Lord. That's what the word means. In the company of the congregation, company of the upright in the congregation. Pasa, to burst into joyful song, mostly in Isaiah. The whole earth is at rest and quiet. They break forth into singing. And you can see that the very words that God gives us to describe giving praise to him, they're filled with energy, with zeal, with thoughtfulness, with specificity. There's nothing vague about it. It's particular. So, acceptable worship in the Old Testament involved homage, service, submission, reverence, and awe towards God, demonstrated not just in a gathering, but in the whole of life, all of our lives. Acceptable worship in the Old Testament also expressed at specific times and places, often involving music. So it's both. So now, those are the words. Now we're going to walk through the history. In the Old Testament, how does this play out? God's initiative is the fundamental factor that determines his relationship with us. He acts, we respond. So in the garden, Adam and Eve were the worshipers, foreshadowing Israel's relationship with God. You had a sacred place, which was Eden, that represented the temple. And you see that in the way the language is used later on in Ezekiel, where it talks about the mountain of God. You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering: sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper. Sapphire, emerald, and carbuncle, and crafted gold were your settings and your engravings, etc., etc. 1 Kings 6:29 has imagery. As the temple's built, it has imagery of Eden. Around all the walls of the house he carved engraved pictures of cherubim and palm trees and open flowers in the inner and outer rooms. He's not just being decorative. It's a reference to the Garden of Eden, where God met with Adam and Eve. You had a sacred person. That's a sacred place. Now you have a sacred person who's Adam. He's the priest. It says in Genesis 2:15, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. Those words are the same words used in Numbers 3 to talk about the work of the priests caring for the temple. Abad and Samar. They shall keep guard over him and over the whole congregation before the tent of the meeting as they minister at the tabernacle. They shall guard all the furnishings of the tent of meeting and keep guard over the people of Israel as they minister at the tabernacle. So that's a connection to this temple. God was present in the Garden of Eden, and now he's going to be present in the temple. Priests were also responsible to teach God's law. So Adam was responsible to rule over the creation. The priests were responsible to rule over God's people. So you have a sacred place, a sacred person, a sacred community. So in the beginning, it was Adam and Eve. They were the community. And that established the horizontal the horizontal part of worship. God says, it's not good that man be alone. So in worshiping God, it's not just me and God. It's us and God. That's how it's always been from the beginning. We're not adding something new to this. Then you have a sacred time, the Sabbath. When do we focus in on this? Well, on the Sabbath. God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation. And then in Exodus 20, for in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. The Lord blessed the seventh day. So there was a unique day set apart from the beginning. And then lastly, there was a sacred covenant. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or there will be dire consequences. So those are all the things that were there from the beginning. So what happened? We had a worshiping relationship with God that was undefiled. It was pure. It was right. It was good. What happened? We said, we can be our own gods. Our worship didn't stop. It was just diverted. It was redirected to ourselves through the deception of the serpent. Once we fell, God didn't give up his plan to have a people, a sacred people, who would meet in a sacred place, sacred time. He restored our ability to approach him and worship him, but only through the offering of a sacrifice. Remember, we talked before in the definitions about how we can't just come to God on our own. You see that when Adam and Eve fell. They couldn't just come to God on their own. There had to be a way for them to approach God now that they had turned away from him. So Japanese author Hattori says, human beings who once served God, worshipped him in sin-free obedience and dependence, are now, this side of their catastrophic rebellion, pursued by him as he displays his gracious redemptive purposes in calling out a new humanity where worship of him will ultimately be unalloyed and unchallenged. So who took the first step after Adam and Eve sinned? What's that? Yeah, God did. Where are you? Adam and Eve didn't realize, oh, we've sinned. We better go make it up to God. God came after them. And throughout Scripture, we see, God's always the one who takes the initiative. He's so gracious. He's so kind. In Genesis 4, we had the first time the phrase occurs, calling on the name of the Lord. To Seth, now Cain and Abel had already happened. And it was bad. They brought sacrifices to the Lord. They knew that much. But it says in Genesis 4:26, to Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. And what is that? Well, there's a realization that we're separated from God. We need to get back to him. So we call on his name. Robert Rayburn says to call upon the name of the Lord meant recognizing and believing all that is indicated in the various names of the Lord and worshiping him for all the aspects of his character which these names revealed. Now, we don't know exactly how much of God they even knew. But we can be sure that Adam and Eve were probably telling them what it was like to be in the garden. God was like this. He was good. He was generous. He was kind. He was gracious. So now on the other side, they're calling on the name of the Lord. They're maybe saying something like, God, our parents, our grandparents, our great-parents said that you're this way. Would you be this way now? Then you have Noah, Genesis 8. That's the first mention of an altar, where an actual altar is built. It's the first mention of a burnt offering. Only clean animals were allowed. And there you see Noah serving as a priest for his family. So you have these categories that are somewhat obscure, but they're there. Looking back, you can see, oh yeah, that's what's happening. Then we have the patriarchal period, where God, again, takes the initiative in revealing himself to Abraham, to Jacob, and to Moses. And whenever God revealed himself in a certain place, typically they would build an altar to remember, this is the place, not where we built something for God. That was Genesis 11, the Tower of Babel. God didn't reveal himself there. We just said, hey, we're gonna build something to God. That didn't work. God has to say, I'm going to reveal myself to you. So they build altars when he appears. Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the Oak of Moreh. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So he built an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. I will remember where the Lord appeared to me. Genesis 12, from there he moved to the hill country on the east side of Bethel and pitched his tent with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east, and there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. So again, Abram is recalling where God had met with him. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So these are the places where God has appeared to Abram, and Abram is saying, I want to remember this. And worship at that time was characterized by sacrifice, prostration, acknowledgement of dependence, or praise. So all the things that we've talked about in the vocabulary. Then we get to Exodus. And in Exodus, God specifically calls out a people, calls out the Israelites, and makes them a covenant community to worship him. So up until this point, there hadn't been a defined people of God. Now he's defining them. And the things that define them are these: offering sacrifices, the Passover feast, and Sabbath observance. Those were crucial to setting them apart from the rest of humanity. And at that time, so after God delivers the Israelites from Egypt, praising and singing, which celebrates God, became more pronounced. We see evidence of it. You know where the first evidence of that is? Book of Exodus. Praising and singing. Think about it. What's that? Exodus 15. What were they celebrating? Yeah, exactly. Getting through the Red Sea. Great time to break into song. What do? You get to the other side, you go, whoo, that was amazing. That was something. No, you break into song. So obviously, there had been some singing before that. It wasn't like that the first time they sang. But now it has a purpose. It has a reason. So Exodus 15 is a song using musical instruments, which looks back to God's deliverance and anticipates God's faithfulness in the future. There's a prophetic aspect to it. It talks about how God is going to bring the nations to dwell on the mountain of his inheritance, the place, O Lord, you made for your dwelling. It anticipates Davidic worship. But this is really embryonic. This is right at the beginning, right at the start. But they're saying, Lord, the nations are going to come to your mountain. I mean, they've just been delivered through the Red Sea. It's a bold statement. But that's what singing does. It gives us an insight, a perspective about the future that's filled with praise and joy and gratefulness. We put all that together, and you sing a song like in Exodus 15. Then you have Mount Sinai, a few chapters later. Peterson says, the significance of Israel's encounter with God at Mount Sinai for an understanding of certain New Testament perspectives on worship can hardly be exaggerated. And when I remember when I read that, I thought, really? I mean, I thought Mount Sinai was important, but like I need to understand that to understand New Testament worship? He's saying, yeah. At Sinai, the encounter between God and his people was founded upon the covenant, which was tied to the past, God's deliverance, the present, Israel's responsibility, and the future, God's promises. So he's making a covenant with them that reflects all three of those. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among all peoples. For all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. So God is saying, I'm going to have a people. I'm going to have a people who are my kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And I want you to be that. So how does worship fit in? Well, the first thing God requires of those who worship him in Mount Sinai is absolute obedience to him as the creator and the redeemer. And that's the basic attitude of anyone who truly worships God. It reinforces the idea that our relationship with God was not to be at the level of the mysterious and the irrational. That's a quote from Peterson. He's saying worship isn't this thing we just feel. Worship is not just an experience. Worship is an attitude of life that is related to our relationship with God that he has spelled out for us. And we're saying, we agree to that. So basically what God was saying to his people was, I just delivered you from Egypt so that you could be mine and so that I could dwell among you. And they either agree or don't agree. Yes, we want that, or no, we don't want that. And in the following chapters, he talks about their social life. He talks about the way you're going to interact with each other, that you're to live holy lives, in essence, to serve God, abad. This is what the worship is supposed to look like. Exodus 24, he spells out the responsibilities of the priests. And that's the beginning of the cult, which is expressed through sacrifice and ritual using sacred enclosures, depending upon the mediation of priests. So he wants to standardize this. He wants to say, this is what you're going to do regularly. And then the last part of Exodus, 25 through 40, he's talking about the place they're going to do it, the tabernacle. Constructed, each detail significant for the worship of God's people. So we're going to look at that, significance of the tabernacle. What's the big deal about the tabernacle? This is what it signified. First, God's presence. Do you realize since the Garden of Eden, God had not had a place to dwell among his people. He dwelt in the Garden of Eden. They could hear God walking in the cool of the day. Not since the Garden of Eden had there been a place that God dwelled with his people. Now, there would be. It's a big deal. So it says, Exodus 29, I will consecrate the tent of meeting in the altar. Aaron also and his sons, I will consecrate to me as priests. I will dwell among the people of Israel and will be their God. Now remember, this is hearkening back to Adam in the garden, where Adam was supposed to be the priest. He was tending the garden. He didn't. He failed. So God's saying, all right, I'm going to establish another set of priests, and I'm going to dwell here. I will be among you. So Eric Alexander said, God redeems in order to inhabit. So he redeemed Israel from the Egyptian army, the Egyptian state, so that he might dwell among them. Exodus 29, they shall know that I am the Lord their God, who brought them out of the land of Egypt. Why? That I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. This is good news. This is such good news. Are you kidding? God's going to dwell with us? Oh yeah. He's not going to be out there anymore. He's going to be right here with us. That's massive. The central message of the tabernacle, this is Ian Dugan, is nothing other than the central message of the covenant. Yahweh, the great king, has promised to be their God and now comes to dwell in their midst. So it represented God's presence. It also represented God's rule. And when you think of the words that are translated worship, serve, those kinds of things, this makes total sense. The 2 tablets given to Moses at Mount Sinai were placed in the Ark of the Covenant. Right at the heart of the Ark of the Covenant were the 10 words, the 10 commandments. They represented God's absolute authority over the lives of the Israelites as a result of his covenant. I don't know if you have this here, but in the States we have people who say that, Jesus can become your Savior, and then later on he'd become your Lord. Have you ever heard that idea? That's so bogus. That's so unbiblical. God says, if you're to come to me, if I redeemed you as my own, my law is going to be absolutely authoritative in your life. There's no separation of those two. Represented God's holiness. So God's presence, God's rule, God's holiness. God wanted to make a point. Even though I'm dwelling in your midst, it's not like I'm just like hanging out with you with the guys. I am holy. I am distinct. I am other. I am transcendent. So you have the holy place and the Holy of Holies. And there's this carpet-thick veil that was only broken through, entered into once a year by the high priest. That should say something. Okay, God's very different. That, in turn, reminds us of our sinfulness. So that's another thing that the tabernacle reminds us of, is our sinfulness. You have the altar of burnt offering outside the holy place, which reminded the Israelites they could not enter the presence of God without a sacrifice. You had the bronze laver for washing and making clean. So he says in Exodus 30, when they go into the tent of meeting, or when they come near to the altar to minister, to burn a food offering to the Lord, they shall wash with water so that they may not die. They shall wash their hands and their feet so that they may not die. There's a verse you can use for your kids if you're trying to get them to wash their hands before dinner. Hey, it says in Exodus 30, I wouldn't use that. It shall be a statute forever to them, even to him and to his offspring throughout their generations. So God's serious about needing to be clean to come into his presence. But then finally, it represents God's mercy and grace. It's, yes, God is present with us. He rules over us. He's holy. We are sinful. But God is merciful and gracious. So you have the mercy seat in the center of the Holy of Holies. Peterson says, animal blood atones for human sin, not because of some magical quality or life power in it, but simply because God chose and prescribed it for this purpose. I have given it to you to make atonement. So God sets up the sacrificial system, which when you read through the Old Testament, it just seems so complicated. So many sacrifices. For this, for that, if you do this, if this happens, if you touch this, if But every one of those was a reminder of how we just can't charge into God's presence. He is that holy. So we have the sacrificial system. God provided a consistent way for his covenant people to deal with their sins when they came into his presence. So that's all set up. And then we have the period of the judges, which we won't talk about. It's just a mess. And then we have 1st and 2nd Samuel, where we see the people asking for a king, not the kind of king that God wanted them to have. They want a king like all the nations. But God says, no, I'm going to pick a king after my own heart. I'm going to pick a king that I want. So he chooses David, a man who praised God with his whole being. David, in spite of his flaws, shows us a lot about how we're to relate to God as those who worship him. For one, he really highlighted musical instruments. So 1 Chronicles 23:5, 4,000 gatekeepers, 4,000 shall offer praises to the Lord with instruments that I have made for praise. That's incredible. That's a lot of work. But it was important. God gave us those instruments to bring praise and glory to God. He organized the Lord's service, so he made it more official. These are the men whom David put in charge of the service of song in the house of the Lord after the ark rested there. They ministered to a song before the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, until Solomon built the house of the Lord in Jerusalem, and they performed their service according to their order. So very specific stipulations for how they were to sing and make music at the tabernacle. He composed 73 psalms of exquisite beauty, theological breadth, and expressiveness. He viewed all of life as lived in the presence of God. And prophecy became more directly associated with music during the time of the monarchy and used in the corporate worship of God. So there are these strange passages that give you an indication. It seemed like music was somehow connected to people prophesying. So 1 Samuel 10, after that you shall come to Gibeah Elohim, where there is a garrison of the Philistines. And there, as soon as you come to the city, you will meet a group of prophets coming down from the high place with harp, tambourine, flute, and lyre before them prophesying. And then you have, in 1 Chronicles 25:1, David and the chiefs of the service, also set apart for the service, the sons of Asaph and Heman and Jeduthun, who prophesied with lyres, with harps, and with cymbals. So there's just this connection that we want to be careful to assume we know exactly what that means, but we can't deny there is some kind of connection between people hearing from the Lord and music being played. And then eventually that led to the building of the temple under Solomon, which marked the culmination of the sacrificial system which began at Sinai. Faithful corporate worship was pulled into a center. And here was Solomon's theology of worship from 1 Kings 8 and 2 Chronicles 5. First, despite the magnificence of the temple, Solomon acknowledged that this temple could not hold the God of all creation. So he's not saying, here's where God finally is. He knows that can't be true. It's representative of God dwelling in the midst of his people. Characteristics of Solomon's worship were historical restatement. This is Peterson, I think. Talking about what had happened, remembering history. Centrality of the Torah, or the Word of God. Humble acknowledgement of God's sovereign greatness. And here you can begin to see a liturgy developing. The centrality of the temple as the place where God meets with his people. An exuberant joy that is the byproduct of wholehearted corporate worship of the living God. It's surprising how many times joy and praise and celebration are mentioned in the Old Testament when God's people gather. There is reverence, there is awe, there is humble submission, there is respect. It's all those things. But now we're beginning to see this. Do you realize what God has done? Doesn't that do something to you? Doesn't that make you want to jump, leap, shout, sing, dance? Isn't that amazing? That kind of perspective. So Peterson says the fact that the year was marked by a whole series of festivals, and I hear you guys have a lot of holidays here. That's what someone told me. More than we have in the States for sure. Although I think the world has more holidays than we have in the States. I'm beginning to think that as I travel to different countries. In Europe, like they get 7 weeks off for work. Just that everybody gets that. That just seems unbelievable to me. But God was concerned that the Israelites had these festivals as a reminder of the extent to which celebration, praise, and thanksgiving were at the heart of the Israelite religion. So we're never to be ashamed or apologize for the fact that when we gather, there is an atmosphere of joy. Now, Pentecostal churches can take that to an extreme, and it can be untethered joy, unconnected joy, not connected to the truths that God tells us to remember. It all fits together. None of this is a separate part. It all fits together. And we are given the privilege of living that out in our gatherings. So that's all there. It's all set up. And how do we do? How do the Israelites do with all that? You have this incredible provision of God. Sacrifices. Yeah. So what's that? That's a great question. They could worship him anywhere, but no place was like worship at the temple. So that was set apart. It was unique because God said, that is where I will make my presence to dwell. So there were laws against offering sacrifices in other places. You can only offer the sacrifices at the temple. But you could write a psalm in the middle of the desert, as David did. So what you can't have, that's a great question. What you can have is the gathered people of God. So people weren't gathering out in the desert for celebrations. They gathered at the temple, or for sacrifices, I should say. Because all that happened before was leading up to this one model, this one foretaste, prototype of what was to come. God was saying, I'm getting ahead of myself, but in John 4, Jesus is saying it's not going to be on this mountain that God's people worship. It's going to be basically through me. It's not going to be a physical place. But until that time, so that we would understand that Jesus is the temple, God established a temple where the people of God would come to offer sacrifices. You couldn't offer a sacrifice of your own at home. You had to come to the temple. Does that make sense? Prayer? Could pray anywhere. Yep. And rightly so. It was mostly the sacrifices that were so crucial. How do you come to God? And when you'd pray outside, you'd probably be depending on the sacrifices that were made before. But if you sinned in a certain way, you would have to go to the temple and get that sacrifice for. So it was a heavy responsibility. But it made us aware of our sin, which God's very concerned about our sin. So Israel didn't do so well with it. There was rising prophetic criticism of the formalism or ritualistic legalism of priestly functions. So you had that time when Saul's waiting for Samuel, and Samuel doesn't show up, so Saul offers the sacrifices himself. And Samuel says he's obeyed the Lord. Samuel says, "Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice." Wow, really? And to listen than the fat of rams. So he's saying that you don't fulfill my will just by offering sacrifices. You fulfill my will by obeying me. And when I say wait for Samuel to get back to offer sacrifices, Samuel who was the priest, Saul wasn't a priest, that it's better to obey me than to think, I can offer sacrifices myself. So Peterson says, many of the prophets, for rebellion is as the sin of divination, presumption is as iniquity and idolatry. So because you've rejected the word of the Lord, he's rejected you from being king. Many of the prophets and psalmists highlighted the failure of Israel to engage with God appropriately by means of the cult. So they were doing it on their own. They were coming up with their own ways of worshiping God, their own times, their own ways, to throw the people more directly upon the divine mercy that lay behind its provision. In other words, God had provided this way of relating to him, and the people said, you know what, we don't really like that. We'd rather do it this way. We'd rather sacrifice our own. We'd rather sacrifice here. We'd rather not sacrifice for that. And so God sent prophets saying, don't do that. I've provided you a way out of my mercy and grace. You can't do this on your own. You need what I've given you to be able to come to me. So, declined in exile. And then we'll finish after this. We're doing great. As the monarchy years continued, idolatry and syncretism increased. And it's just incredible as you read through the Old Testament, how often, there's a good king and things go well, and then when he dies, just right down. The high places aren't taken away. They're still there. People are still offering sacrifices outside the temple. And it's just like, are you kidding me? What is going on? Well, we're just rejecting what God's given us. So Jeroboam rejects God's rule, sets up Bethel and Dan as alternate worship sites, resulting in God withdrawing his presence. Continued prophetic criticism of religious hypocrisy and formalism. So what happened? Worship was no longer a response to God's grace, but a means of justifying disobedience. That happens today. Where we go to church because we want to make up for the way we live this week. God says, I will not take that. That doesn't, because it denies grace. You are not going to earn anything from me. You can't. Your hearts are continually leaning towards rebellion. But I'm gracious and I'm merciful, and I've provided a way for you to come to me. And if you come that way, you will find my mercy and my grace. But we don't come that way. And we start to use the very means that God has given us as means of grace, as means of achievement, effort, advancing our own cause. Look how holy we are. We don't come to church because we're holy. We come to church because we're needy. We are holy, but not so that we can be holy in the sense of, see, look at me, I can come to church. Reformations did occur. It's kind of an up and down progress, usually in response to a renewed awareness of the book of the law. Throw out a question, why do you think that was? Why do you think people became more aware of God's provision of the sacrificial system, the mercy and grace behind that, when there was a new awareness of the book of the law? What would that produce in people? So they find the book of the law. Yeah? Joy. Would that be the first response? I don't think so. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Oh my. We're supposed to be doing all these things, and we're not. So yeah, I think the first response is weeping, sorrow, awareness of sin. But then you realize, oh, but God's made this provision for dealing with our sin. Yeah. So the Passover is celebrated. So the sacrifices are reinstituted. So everybody's going, this is great. But what do right away? Go back. Just easier. Just go back to doing what we were doing before. It's just easier. Now at that time, too, music and psalms were a part of the restoration. So when things came back together, music played a big part of it. So I'm trying to tie together these things. Why do we keep talking about music? Because it's in the Bible. 2 Chronicles 30. And the people of Israel who were present at Jerusalem kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with great gladness. And the Levites, I think this is under Hezekiah, 2 Chronicles 30. And the Levites and the priests praised the Lord day by day, singing with all their might to the Lord. And this is great. And Hezekiah spoke encouragingly to all the Levites who showed good skill in the service of the Lord. That's a verse for pastors to encourage their musicians. Just saying. So they ate the food of the festival for 7 days, sacrificing peace offerings, giving thanks to the Lord, the God of their fathers. So what are they doing? Singing with all their might to the Lord. Because they were so happy that the law had been rediscovered and they were now going to obey God. Just made them really happy. God took initiative to restore corporate temple worship when he brought the exiles back from Babylon through Ezra, Haggai, and Nehemiah. And what did he tell them to do? Use songs and musical instruments. And at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites in all their places to bring them to Jerusalem to celebrate the dedication with gladness, with thanksgivings, and with singing, with cymbals, harps, and lyres. And the sons of the singers gathered together from the districts surrounding Jerusalem, from the villages of the Netophathites, and also from Beth Gilgal, and from the region of Geba and Asmapheth. For the singers had built for themselves villages around Jerusalem. Like, we're getting serious about this. We're gonna make this a big deal. Lots of singing, lots of music. The Lord has brought us back. In time, synagogues arose after the temple was destroyed, focusing on the reading and teaching of the Torah. Singing was led by a cantor. And then we have messianic hope and perspectives increasing, especially in Ezekiel, talking about a rebuilt temple. So again, that temple is really significant. This is the place where God's making his presence known. He's making his rule known. He's making people aware of his holiness, our sin, and his mercy and grace. The rebuilt temple was by no means greater than the first temple in size or splendor. So they had a temple destroyed, rebuilt it. It wasn't the one that Ezekiel's prophecy pointed to. The failure of Israel to engage with God in the way that he required, in the cult and in everyday life, culminated in the terrible judgment of exile. Yet, the prophetic hope for the restoration of Israel and the blessing of the nations was intimately connected with the vision of renewed worship in a restored temple. What's that temple going to be? They didn't know for 400 years. And then he appeared. And that's going to be in our next section.